Welcome to the Joseph Goldstein Insight Hour. This podcast is an expression of our shared interest in self-discovery. Join Joseph as he shares his deep knowledge of the path of mindfulness. If you are interested in supporting this podcast, please go to BeHereNowNetwork.com/Joseph.
Tonight I'd like to finish the discussion we began last week on mundane right view, and then examine the liberating aspect of this first step of the Noble Eightfold Path. So the last two statements the Buddha made regarding worldly right view first affirms that there are beings who are reborn spontaneously in other realms. And then the second statement is that there are in the world wise and virtuous people who have realized the truth through their own direct experience. So regarding the first of these, that there are beings who are reborn spontaneously in other realms, we spoke last week of staying open to the possibilities, at least, of things beyond our direct experience. In the Buddha's teachings, we're not at all enjoined to blind belief. But it's also helpful, as we mentioned, that it's good not to be attached to blind disbelief. That is, understanding that there are things beyond the realm of what we now know, and that it could be helpful to at least stay open to the possibility of them. The last aspect of mundane right view is one that I find particularly relevant now in our own Western culture. That is, that there are wise and virtuous people who have realized the truth for themselves through direct experience. As most of us know, as a society, we don't generally recognize wisdom as a cultural value. We value talent, we value wealth, we value looks. Occasionally we value intelligence. But I haven't seen any magazine covers dedicated to the wisest person of the year. There's the sexiest man alive and the most beautiful woman alive. But where's the wisest person alive? And in some way, I think our egalitarian values, which are so important, but sometimes they might diminish the understanding that there actually are people who are wiser than we are. People from whom we can genuinely learn something about how to live in a way that's in harmony, in a way that's in accord with the truth. So when we acknowledge this, which is what the Buddha is saying in the last part of this worldly right view, that there are beings who have realized for themselves, through their own experience, the truth, the nature of the Dhamma. When we acknowledge this, it also keeps us open to wisdom from unexpected sources. And we learn to listen for that voice of genuine experience rather than being influenced either positively or negatively by personality or position. I've had a number of experiences in my life, where real wisdom was coming out of some pretty unpleasant personalities. And the first reaction is somebody we don't like, they're abrasive, one thing or another, and we pull back and we tend to discount what they say. But if we stay open and are just listening for that authentic voice, is this true? Does this make sense? It keeps us open to learning from a wide range of people and situations. And by recognizing that there are wise, awakened beings in the world, it helps us reaffirm that this is a possibility for ourselves as well. Yes, awakening is possible. We can actually develop our wisdom, our understanding. So we can practice the various aspects of mundane right view in different ways. Some may be very obvious to us, like the practice of generosity that we spoke about. And understanding that it has power, that it bears fruit. Or by investigating our motivations and practicing acting on those that are wholesome and abandoning those that are unwholesome. Other aspects of right view may not be immediately apparent. So we might want to experiment a bit. It's almost as if we try them on for size, seeing how they affect the quality of our lives. For example, what would it be like, and what influence would it have on our lives, if we really entertained the notion of rebirth, of other lives? Even if it's something we don't really know, we're not sure about, we may even be skeptical of it, but it's part of the teachings. What would it be like just to consider it? How would it affect us? Just as a simple example of this trying on for size, I found that being open to this teaching of rebirth, not knowing, not being able to say for certainty that it's true, but being open to it and considering it, it's taken a certain pressure off of my life. Within the realm of the mundane, of worldly happiness, I no longer feel that compulsive need to fulfill every desire or to accomplish every goal. If not this life, maybe next life. And time is going by so fast. It's like our whole life, and sometimes it just feels like a long weekend. And if I don't become an expert skier this time around, or whatever our particular desires are, then there's time. Okay, well, we'll do it next time around. This way of seeing things, this way of holding things, allows us to prioritize what seems most important. When we consider all the possibilities of what we can do with our lives, not feeling that we need to accomplish everything or need to do everything that comes up in terms of our desires, it allows us to prioritize and say, well, what's really important? Let me give attention to the most important without feeling that I'm missing out on something, or losing something. And so it all gets much more relaxed. Of course, as we begin now the discussion of supra-mundane right view, or what could be called noble right view, we'll see that real freedom lies in letting go of all craving, all desire for acquisition, all desire for becoming. That supra-mundane right view is about cutting through that great Gordian knot of self. So noble right view, or awakened right view, is described in two different ways in the suttas. First, it's described as a particular function of the mind, namely the mental factor of wisdom. Now, in the Abhidhamma, the Buddhist psychology, wisdom, or in Pali it's called panya, is one of the 25 beautiful mental states. And just that, I love that translation of when the Buddha is describing, what's wholesome, he talks about the beautiful mental states. And it really suggests to us that we begin to appreciate those qualities in our own minds, the beautiful qualities. So the function of panya, the function of wisdom, of this beautiful quality, is to illuminate what is arising so that we can know and understand things clearly. We can see things clearly, know things as they are. So the functioning of wisdom is likened to turning on a light in a darkened room. We turn on the light and everything in the room is illuminated. Wisdom, this wisdom factor, is the factor of mind that enlightens us, that awakens us. And in the great list of the 37 principles of enlightenment, wisdom appears in 4 different groupings. It's so important. It appears in the 5 spiritual faculties and the 5 spiritual powers, which is faith or confidence, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. It appears as one of the 7 factors of enlightenment. And in that list, wisdom is called investigation of states, investigation of the Dhamma. So it serves as a clue to us in terms of, okay, how does wisdom function? By investigating, by illuminating what's so. And wisdom is this part of right view, which is the first step on the Noble Eightfold Path. So one way we can understand awakened right view is as this wisdom factor. The second way, noble or supra-mundane right view is described, is in terms of its objective content. That is, what does wisdom discover when it illuminates our experience? So it's not only the function of investigation, it's also about what we learn, what we understand. In one sutta, Sariputta, the great chief disciple of the Buddha, he described 16 different ways of understanding right view. In terms of craving, in terms of dependent origination, in terms of contact, in terms of feeling. It just goes on and on. The Buddha is so clear in describing the importance of this. He said, "Bhikkhus, there is no single factor so potent in promoting the good of living beings as right view." No single factor so potent as promoting the good of living beings as right view. So it's worth our attention. Can we learn to understand it and develop it? In the Satipatthana Sutta, which we've been discussing, this liberating right view refers specifically to the understanding of the 4 Noble Truths. As Buddha says, what bhikkhus is right view? It is the understanding of suffering, dukkha, its causes, its cessation, and the way leading to the cessation, the ending, the putting down of suffering. So we begin with a conceptual understanding of the 4 Noble Truths. We use our intellect, we use our intelligence to begin to learn, to study, to understand what these 4 truths are. And then through practice, we gradually deepen our intuitive, direct, immediate realization of them. So in this way, we could see right view as both the beginning and the end of the path. We start with right view. It sets the direction for us. So our practice is leading us in the right direction. And then the whole path culminates in these understandings. And it's mindfulness of the Four Noble Truths, which is in fact the last set of instructions in the Satipatthana Sutta. This is what the Buddha ends with. After all of the different elements of mindfulness, of body, of feelings, of mind, of all the different categories of experience, he ends this very powerful discourse instructing us to be mindful of these four truths. So we've already discussed the first three of them in previous talks. Tonight I'd like to review and highlight just a few key elements of them as they pertain to the right view of the awakened mind. So we've all experienced the truth of suffering. Somebody just told me of another translation of dukkha, which is very hard to translate. And so when you hear suffering, you really need, perhaps we should just use the Pali word of dukkha, because it means so many things. It means things are unsatisfying or stressful. So the translation somebody just told me about, he said somebody had suggested that it means dysfunctional. The things just don't quite fit together the way we'd like them to. Okay, so dukkha means all of these things, and all of us have experienced this often in our lives. We certainly experience dukkha in terms of the body. It gets older, it gets sick, eventually it dies. We know of the suffering of the mind in terms of all the afflictive emotions that can arise. Fear, anger, jealousy, despair, envy, hatred, boredom, restlessness. There's a long list of emotions and mind states that are afflictive. They afflict us, they're uneasy. Association with the unpleasant is dukkha. Separation from the pleasant is dukkha. Not getting what we want is dukkha. We're all very familiar with these experiences. And then the Buddha summed all of this up in just a single phrase, which is even more fundamental and comprehensive. And it's a phrase that highlights the extent and subtlety of our wrong view. The phrase the Buddha uses to illustrate or to describe this first truth, noble truth of dukkha, it really brings into stark relief our wrong view of things. And he said, in brief, the 5 aggregates of clinging are suffering. The 5 aggregates of clinging are dukkha. So what does this mean? That's just a very few words that encompasses so much. Because these 5 aggregates, which constitute everything we claim as being self, the material elements, called rupa in Pali, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness, each of these 5 aggregates, and in combination, they're all in constant, rapid change and flux. In fact, they're changing much more quickly than we usually even perceive. And because this nature of them is to change and change so quickly, there's nothing in the nature of the aggregates, which constitute all of our experience, there is nothing in their nature that can provide a place of peace, of rest, of security, that really are a refuge. And the more we cling to that which in its nature is subject to change and dissolution, the more we suffer. It seems so obvious. if we're holding on to what in its nature is going to change, the more tightly we grasp, the more we suffer. But even though it seems so clear and so obvious, the pattern of clinging is very strong. Forms, sounds, tastes, odors, tactiles, and all mental objects. This is the terrible bait of the world, with which the world is infatuated. But when one has transcended this, the mindful disciple of the Buddha shines radiantly like the sun, having transcended Mara's realm. And I just love that phrase, the terrible bait of the world. It's like the world's going by and every little experience has a hook on it. And we're like fish, biting on this and biting on that. So there are just a few examples of this out of innumerable ones, that so affect our lives. But I just wanted to make it a little concrete. As I said, there are many, many examples, but in a very simple way, especially living here in New England. If we're attached to summer, to nice, warm, sunny weather, how do we feel in the dead of winter, when it's freezing and icy? If we're attached to summer, we're going to be miserable in the winter. And many people are. If we're attached to looking and feeling young, how do we feel as the body ages? How much energy does our society put in to feeding this desire? In terms of advertisement, in terms of products, in terms of production of things, all devoted to holding on to a particular form of the body. That's attachment to the first aggregate, attached to the pleasant feeling we get from looking young. That's attachment to Vedana, to the second aggregate, attached to the perception of youth. It's the third aggregate. It really struck home for me personally. I haven't had a beard since I was in my 30s. And just on the last retreat, I just thought, for the fun of it, I'll start growing a little beard. And I was shocked to see how white it was as it grew out. And there was that moment, do I want to do this? Attachment to perception. Attachment to the third aggregate. Attachment to all the volitions and mental states, to accomplish it. And attachment to our identification with the one knowing all of this. So right in this very simple and rather common example, we see dukkha, in short, the 5 aggregates subject to clinging. What is so amazing is that even in the face of recognizing impermanence, because this is not an esoteric hidden truth. It's not like some mystery that things are changing. We all know it. We see it, around us and in us. So even in the face of something so obvious and so apparent, what's amazing is that the habit of clinging remains so strong. You'd think we would learn. But as we all know, it takes repeated practice to see this again and again on deeper and deeper levels. Now, what feeds and nourishes this habit of grasping is one particular kind of wrong view. And it's a view that keeps us bound to samsara, keeps us bound to this wheel of becoming. And in Pali, it's called Sakkaya Ditthi, or wrong view of self. Sometimes that Sakkaya Ditthi is translated as personality view. Now, it's easy to think of this, this wrong view of self as a basic Buddhist philosophic principle. It's a basic part of the Buddhist philosophy. But if we think of it in that way, we can miss the critical importance that it plays in our lives. This is what the Buddha said. He said, "Bhikkhus, I see nothing so blameworthy as wrong view. Wrong view is the most blameworthy of all things. Bhikkhus, there is no single factor so responsible for the suffering of living beings as wrong view." So this is not about philosophy. This is about understandings that condition how we live and how we act. This is a matter of critical importance if we're on a path of happiness, if we really want to be happy and awake in our lives. So why is the Buddha making such a strong declaration about this? Because so many of our unwholesome actions, with their attendant karmic results, are born from this wrong view of self. As long as this view is the central understanding of our lives, as it is for most people, this strong reference point of self is the central understanding of how most of us live, then we spend an endless amount of energy trying to gratify the self, defend it, hold on to it, protect it. And all of this very potent karmic activity is revolving around something that isn't even there. So this is the great power of delusion in our minds. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes wisdom comes from very unexpected sources. So this little piece of wisdom comes from a mystery novel written by John Burdett, who wrote these series of novels, mystery novels set in Bangkok. So they all have a kind of Buddhist flavor. So this is a little bit of Panya from John Burdett. You see, dear reader, speaking frankly without any intention to offend, you are a ramshackle collection of coincidences, held together by a desperate and irrational clinging. There is no center at all. Everything depends on everything else. Your body depends on the environment. Your thoughts depend on whatever junk floats in from the media. Your emotions are largely from the reptilian end of your DNA. Your intellect is a chemical computer that can't add up a zillionth as fast as a pocket calculator. And even your best side is a superficial piece of social programming that will fall apart just as soon as your spouse leaves with the kids and the money in the joint account, or the economy starts to fail and you get the sack, or you get conscripted into some idiot's war, or they give you the news about your brain tumor. To name this amorphous morass of self-pity, vanity, and despair self is not only the height of hubris, it is also proof, if any were needed, that we are above all a delusional species. We are in a trance from birth to death. Prick the balloon and what do you get? Emptiness. Take 2 steps in the divine art of Buddhist meditation, and you will find yourself on a planet you no longer recognize. Those needs and fears you thought were the very bones of your being turn out to be no more than bugs in your software. That's really all we need to know. But in more classical terms, this is what the Buddha had to say about this wrong view of self. Suppose, bhikkhu, a dog tied up on a leash was bound to a strong post or pillar. It would just keep on running and revolving around that same post. So too, uninstructed worldlings regard form as self, feeling as self, perception, volitional formations, consciousness as self. They just keep running and revolving around form, around feelings, around perceptions, volitional formations, around consciousness, and they keep on running and revolving around them. As they keep on running and revolving around them, they are not freed from them. They are not freed from birth, aging, and death, not freed from sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair, not freed from suffering. So that image is very powerful for me. Just a dog tied up, to a post or a pillar, just running around, not being freed from it. And the Buddha is saying that's just what we're doing as we cling to the 5 aggregates. We're just running around, clinging to them, and thus not freed from the very characteristics of those aggregates. Birth, aging, all the afflictive emotions, not freed from suffering. Now here the Buddha is laying out so clearly the first 2 noble truths, suffering and its causes. And it's helpful to remember the Buddha's charge to us regarding these truths. He said the truth of suffering is to be understood, and the causes of suffering are to be abandoned. So how do we go about accomplishing this and realizing this for ourselves? Realizing for ourselves the 3rd noble truth, which is the end of suffering, the putting down of dukkha. It's this realization, it's this direct experience, direct intuition, which takes us from the conceptual level of understanding, from worldly right view, to what the Buddha calls the right view that is noble, taintless, supra-mundane, a factor of the path. So the instructions are so clear. Although as we know, they require great patience and perseverance, really to integrate them fully in our understanding and in our lives. Here's where the Buddha told us precisely what to do. He said, "Bhikkhu, whatever is not yours, abandon it. When you have abandoned it, that will lead to your welfare and happiness." Suppose, bhikkhus, people were to carry off the grass, sticks, branches, and foliage in this Jeta's grove, which was a grove that Prince Jeta had offered to the Buddha and the order of monks and nuns. Suppose, bhikkhus, people were to carry off the grass, sticks, branches, and foliage in this Jeta's grove, or to burn them, or to do with them as they wish. Would you think people are carrying us off, or burning us, or doing with us as they wish? No, venerable sir, because those things are neither ourself nor what belongs to ourself. So then the Buddha goes on, and this is so incisive if we can really practice it. So too, bhikkhus, form is not yours, feeling is not yours, perception is not yours, volitional formations are not yours, consciousness is not yours. Abandon it. What you have abandoned, that will lead to your welfare and happiness. So what does abandonment mean? It means not being identified with it, not claiming it as self. And this is a very interesting practice to do. This is not about Buddhist philosophy. It's about how we're relating to the constituent elements of our experience. On my last retreat, I just a little while ago finished a 7-week self-retreat, and this phrase came to mind. And many times, especially when I felt my mind being caught in one thing or another, I would remind myself of this teaching. Form is not self, perception is not self, feelings are not self. Not I, not mine, not myself. And as I would remember that and apply that, we can feel just the release, the relaxation of the heart. So this is the underlying context for whatever particular practice you may be doing. Does it serve and enhance samadhi? This noble right view of non-self. So we can open on deeper and deeper levels to the direct experience of this most easily through refining our awareness of the impermanent, changing nature of the 5 aggregates, of each one of them. Again, the aggregates being a shorthand for everything we experience. Everything that we experience is included in the 5 aggregates. So we begin to deconstruct the concept of self, first by being mindful of what is actually arising moment to moment, and then investigating through panya, through wisdom, really illuminating the momentary, fleeting, insubstantial nature of these very experiences. Now, there are different ways of going about doing this. You might spend some sustained periods of time focusing on a particular aggregate, just to play, to experiment. So you might choose for a period of time just to focus on the body, rupa, the physical elements, being as continuously aware of the body as possible. And it might be the breath, it might be sensations in the body, it might be the movement of the body, the changing of postures. But you're really directing your attention in a sustained way just to mindfulness of the body and really seeing how it's continually changing. Whatever it is that you're aware of is in constant flux. You might focus for some time on the impermanent nature of feeling, the second aggregate. Recognizing just moment after moment that characteristic quality of the experience. Is it pleasant? Is it unpleasant? Is it neutral? Really highlighting that flavor of each moment of experience. Is it pleasant? Is it unpleasant? Is it neutral? And seeing how that too is in constant flux. The more we experience the impermanence of these experiences, the less we cling to them, the less we take them to be self. We can pay for some time particular attention to perceptions, the third aggregate, which is the recognition and interpretation of objects, different objects of the senses. And we begin to see through mindfulness of perception that how we perceive things strongly conditions how we feel about things and how we think about things. So perception is a very powerful formation for us. So I'll just give you an example of how different ways of perceiving things can really change how we feel. Years ago, this happened many, many years ago when I was first beginning teaching. I was out in California. I was teaching up in the Redwoods, teaching a retreat. And I was sitting just before the early morning sitting. I was sitting with Sharon Salzberg, one of my teaching colleagues. And we were sitting in our room just, waiting to go into the hall. And just in a moment, I burped a cloud of smoke and ash. This whole cloud of smoke and sweet-smelling ash came out of my mouth. It was very weird. I mean, it was really weird. It's like, what is this? Yeah, and she could see it. There were like little particles of ash. So it was pretty strange. But what to do? We had to go sit. A couple of weeks later, this was in 1975, we were back in Maine beginning the teaching of our first 3-month retreat up in Bucksport, Maine. And before the course started, I went into the bank to cash a check or something, and right in front of the teller, I was right at the teller's window. Again, this the cloud of smoke and ash comes out of my... Very strange. So then I realized, what is this? So I started asking around. And there aren't too many people you can ask about this. But at that time, Ram Dass was studying with this teacher in New York, Joya. And there was a whole scene around this quite psychic woman. So I had somebody ask Joya about it. And she said, oh, that's the vibhuti. It's like the holy ash of Sai Baba, who's one of the great saints in India. And he kind of psychically or magically produces ash, which he gives to people. That's holy ash. Oh, holy ash. The vibhuti of Sai Baba. I felt great. That was a really good feeling. Months later, Munindra, my first Dharma teacher, was here, and I asked him about it. And he said, oh, it is the fire element. Well, that felt kind of neutral. It didn't make me happy, didn't make me anything. Oh, okay, the fire element. Then sometime after that, I was with Deepama, a wonderful teacher from Calcutta. And I told her the story, and she said, oh, you must have some disease. That didn't feel so good. Same experience, different perceptions create very different mind states, very different stories, very different feelings, all coming from this aggregate of perception, how we recognize and interpret things. And we get so lost in the world of our perceptions and interpretations, even about very ordinary experiences in our lives, just getting lost in the endless stories, we create about ourselves and the world. How much of the day are we living in this dreamlike nature of thoughts? I know you've all had the experience because it's a common meditative one, the mind getting caught up and lost in thought, lost in some story and some plan and some memory, with all kinds of attendant feelings and emotions. And then in a certain moment, we awaken from being lost and realize there was nothing there. That was just like an empty thought passing through the mind. But we invested so much in it and was so caught by it. So we really want to pay attention to that moment of awakening, because it highlights for us what the nature of perception is. And we can learn to recognize that aggregate and not cling to it. It's tremendously freeing. We can practice for some time just being mindful of the body in its different manifestations. Maybe for some time practice just watching feelings, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Maybe for some time practice just watching the perceptions, the way we're recognizing, interpreting things. Can also practice a sustained mindfulness of the mental formations. All the moods, emotions, mind states, reactions, and even meditative states of calm, of peace, that arise. Remembering that all of them, whether they're pleasant, whether they're unpleasant, all of them are not self, are not me, are not mine. That's the wisdom we want to apply to our experience of each of the aggregates. That's where the freedom is. So we're not just running around the pillar, attached to the suffering inherent in the aggregates. And this is the tremendous liberating power of mindfulness. We can be mindful of them, seeing them with wisdom, or we're not mindful of them, caught up and bound. And on the most subtle level, we need to cut through the identification with consciousness, not creating a haven for wrong view by taking consciousness or the knowing faculty to be self. The instructed noble disciples do not regard form as self, not feeling as self, not perception as self, no volitional formations as self, no consciousness as self. They no longer keep running and revolving around them. As they no longer keep running around them, they are freed from them, freed from birth, aging, and death, freed from sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair, free from suffering. So again, the instructions are very clear, and on a conceptual level, I think it's very clear. But we need to train our minds. We need to actually put it into practice. So there's another way we can practice. In addition to perhaps, if it's of interest to you, taking some sustained periods of time with each of the aggregates, one way that I was experimenting in my own retreat, I started just over a period of time on a moment-to-moment level, paying attention to which of the aggregates came into the foreground of experience. So not predetermining what I was going to pay attention to, not having an agenda, but just going through the day and noticing in different experiences and in a rather moment-to-moment way, which of the aggregates in this moment is in the foreground. So, for example, you might be walking outside and you're just feeling the sensations of the moving. So that's mindfulness of the aggregate of form, rupa, the physical elements. You might feel the warmth of the sun, or maybe a cold blast of wind. That's also the physical elements. So you recognize that. This is this first aggregate of material elements. But then, in a moment, the feeling of pleasant or unpleasantness may just come into the foreground, may become predominant. You feel the blast of cold and you really feel it as unpleasant. Or you feel the warmth and you feel it as pleasant. So you recognize that. That's the feeling aggregate. Maybe you hear a sound and you recognize it as a bird. Where you see something and you recognize it as a tree or a building or a person. That moment of recognition and even perhaps subliminal naming, that's perception. So I was just doing walking meditation. All of this is so simple. It's just doing it. I was just doing some walking and I heard a car in the distance and I could just see my mind just in the moment, just hearing, and then car. And I was just paying attention and really noticing, which of the aggregates? That's perception. And it got interesting simply to watch the interplay of these 5 aggregates. So it goes from being kind of an abstract teaching, really to help us understand what our experience is, how it's unfolding moment to moment. So we have a momentary perception of what's arising. And then, you might notice a feeling of being gladdened by the warmth or by the bird song. Or maybe you feel a reaction to a person you're seeing That's the aggregate of mental formations: liking, disliking, wanting. And sometimes maybe you're walking or sitting and you're just resting in awareness that really what's primary for your mindfulness is the knowing faculty itself. And all the other things are happening, but you're really giving most attention to the knowing. So then that's mindfulness of the fifth aggregate of consciousness. So in this way of practice, there's no particular order, to how they appear. We're just open to whatever it is that spontaneously becomes most predominant. And this is right view as the wisdom factor. It's simply illuminating what is most predominant, what comes into the foreground in each moment. And we see its impermanent, selfless nature. In one discourse, the Buddha said there are two conditions for the arising of right view. And again, just remember when he said he saw no factor so potent for the happiness of beings as right view. So he said there are two conditions for the arising of right view: the voice of another and wise attention. So you've been hearing the voice of another. The wise attention is up to you. Let's sit for a few moments.